You may want to turn your volume down. I cannot seem to control the volume on my microphone. I'm sure that you are all cursing Dr. Hala, as I am, for teaching me how to do this so that I can teach while I'm at a undoubtedly very productive meeting. At this stage, you've already done your presentations, so we are now kind of launching into the remainder of the PowerPoint slides. Luckily, it should not take too long. Undoubtedly, as I show you a video, you'll have to adjust volume. I apologize, but I couldn't quite figure out how to adjust the microphone. Okay, so what I would like you guys to do is take out your packet of notes that I provided for you for this class, and I want you to write down questions that you have on each of these slides. This way that when I come back to class, we can kind of run through questions that you guys have so I can re-explain stuff. I'm not expecting this to be remotely perfect. Alright, so interest groups. Interest groups are essentially a group of people who have similar interests and are doing what they can to influence policy. The lobbyists, as we remember from our good friend Ulysses S. Grant, lobbyists, basically, that term developed from the fact that Grant got drunk at the hotel next door to the White House every night, and people accosted him in the lobby because he was more open to making changes and doing what they wanted. But essentially today, a lobbyist is anyone who is trying to alter policy, and they can do that through a variety of different ways. And we've talked about some of these ways before, but it could be through litigation, it could be through trying to make a donation to a member of Congress, it could be just trying to get some sort of influence. We've talked about how they have a great deal of influence in the subcommittee stage where they are trying to get the details of a law down. And finally, political action committees. Political action committees, for the simplest definition, tend to be the political donation wing of interest group organizations. So it could be someone who is writing an advertisement and putting it on TV or the internet for one group or another. And we're going to talk more about political action committees as we go, so I don't want you to worry so much about what the definition is, because hopefully that will become more apparent as we continue. Basically this slide, don't worry about this, but the basic point is that the idea is that the number of PACs has grown and grown over the last, from 2000 to 2008. Dissolutions is how many they've disappeared. It doesn't really matter. Okay. There's several types of interest groups, and we've talked about so basically now the National Organization for Women and the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, they're both multi-interest groups, meaning that there's more than one issue that they're interested in. Now might be interested in, as our good friend Herwin Cain has demonstrated, into sexual harassment charges, but also in equal pay for women, as well as women fighting, allowed to fight in combat in the military. So there'll be multiple issues that women would be interested in, or now would be interested in. The NAACP is an interest group. Is an interest group that would be interested in affirmative action. It could be interested in inner city public schools. It could be interested in just public school education overall. It could be talking about an achievement gap. It could be talking about the lack of African Americans in the president's cabinet. It could be any number of things. A single issue group is something like the NRA. It's simple. It's an NRA, as we've talked about, the National Rifle Association, is all about guns. It does not delve into abortion. It doesn't delve into anything else, and it has been absurdly successful at this stage. And because of that, actually, Democrats refuse to bring up gun rights, gun legislation at all. And then there is the NARAL, which is a pro-choice organization, and I am looking it up because for the life of me, I cannot remember what that acronym stands for. And apparently they don't know either. So it's not that big of a deal. I'm not going to worry about it, but they are a pro-choice group. All right. So, basically, but again, it's a single issue group. They're only worried about abortion and the right for women to have an abortion. They are not concerned about other elements. So this is just the difference between a multi-interest group and a single issue group. A trade and economic interest group is basically someone who is out to make money. So we are talking about like the AFL-CIO, which is a labor union, and the AFL-CIO exists essentially to make sure that workers have rights, workers are making money, and so they want to make sure that there's a minimum wage, they want to make sure that their workers have the right to bargain. The AMA, which is the American Medical Association, which is fairly important to understand, that they support doctors. And they're important because, it's significant because essentially they support almost always the Republican Party, where the AFL-CIO supports almost always the Democratic Party. And the American Medical Association is significant because they end up having they're opposed to a lot of damages given out if a doctor does something wrong in a malpractice suit. So they are the ones who are supporting Republicans in a large part because they are supporting putting caps on damages, so that if someone messed up my knee surgery, that I wouldn't be able to sue for more than $250,000 or $500,000 or whatever cap they would want to make. There is currently no cap. But that is why the American Medical Association supports the Republicans, where I'm going to call it the Association for Trial Lawyers, but it might be called something else, always supports the Democrats because they are in favor of getting as much as they can. Okay. There's also the Chamber of Commerce, and they exist essentially to support a lot of local businesses and do what they can. In fact, generally you'd think that these two the AFL-CIO and the Chamber of Commerce would be opposed to each other. However, they both actually support elements of the American Jobs Act, the ones that are promoting infrastructure, because they're both supporting business, which makes the Chamber of Commerce happy because businesses are making money, like construction companies, and it makes the AFL-CIO happy because there's more jobs. So they're not always opposed to each other, even though the AFL-CIO generally supports Democrats and the Chamber of Commerce supports Republicans. All right. There's also public interest groups, and their goal is to help others. The AARP is it's the retired people, American Association for Retired People. We'll go with that. You can look it up and tell me I'm wrong later. But essentially, their goal is to advocate for the elderly, and so all kinds of, in theory, they call themselves a public interest group. There's also the National Right to Life Coalition, which does the same thing, and it does a similar thing. So you can see that there's a blend between a public interest group and a single issue group. You could argue just as well that there would be people who would argue that NARAL, whatever that stands for, would be considered a public interest group. That would depend on your point of view completely. And lastly, essentially, there are governmental groups because states want money. Local governments want money. So they will go and talk to Congress, and they will essentially form an interest group and lobby and ask for more money. And they have done so quite successfully. All right. There are also a variety of ways that interest groups lobby, and one of which is testifying in full or subcommittees. That's when they are sort of expert witnesses, and they're testifying as to how a law would affect their interest group, whether it's an environmental interest, so it might be about saving the manatees or the whales, or it could be something along the lines of how it would affect doctors or trial lawyers or any number of other businesses. Could affect the steel industry. They directly interact with members of Congress and their staffs. So essentially, they are having face-to-face meetings. They are doing what they can to try to, garner influence. They provide research, so they will have some sort of study that may or may not be valid that provides their point of view and demonstrates their evidence. They also, as we talked about before, suggest or provide legislation. It might be a piece of legislation, like an entire piece of legislation, or it could be the details of a legislation, of a law, rather. Okay? And so there's any number of ways that can be done. They would get members of their group to send letters and emails so that the size of an interest group is not always important. What I mean is that essentially you are multiplying the amount of representation you have because you have all of your members send in letters to all kinds of different members of Congress, their members of Congress, and however. So you might be the NRA trying to garner some influence that way. But basically it's you're sending out form letters. And like when I said I was working for Mikulski's office, they just counted those form letters. They work on campaigns, so it might be that if a candidate represents your views, like if you are a member of the AFL-CIO, you will support most likely Barack Obama for president. And so you will have members of their interest group work on his campaign or someone else's campaign. A member of another interest group might work on another campaign. They send home legislative report cards, like the conservatives will say that Senator Mitch McConnell gets a B for, being a conservative and voting on these conservative issues. Or the NRA will send out one that says that Eric Cantor gets an A and Jim Moran gets a D. And they do that by kind of trying to intimidate or really inform their members of how people vote. They try to find patrons and co-sponsors for bills, and they will donate to campaigns. And the last one is litigation. So when we talk about litigation, we're talking about you might not have a ton of popular support, but there's a precedent. For example, the NAACP that we talked about before has used litigation in the past. Their issue, particularly in the 30s and 40s, was not nearly as popular as it was in the 60s. So litigation creates precedent, right? So that once you have declared schools must be integrated, then that's how it is. They would also donate to campaigns, and we've talked about campaigns before, and so like the American Medical Association would make a number of campaigns donations to Republican candidates. They would not have lawsuits, because this is their whole issue, and they would most likely not also get involved in grassroots or like popular support, because really there isn't popular support among the people who are yelling that they're getting too much money when doctors mess up. Okay, so the three issues of grassroots support, campaign donations, and litigation. As you can see, the American Medical Association would do campaign donations. NAACP does two things. It uses litigation. It also uses grassroots, as they get issues, particularly today, that get people that are popular. And you have groups like the Sierra Club, or other environmental organizations that will use litigation to protect in the environment, and they will also appeal to the people, like the grassroots, much like the 99% or the Occupy protests that are going on right now. And like the NRA would use grassroots support as well, because there's an overwhelming support for gun rights in the United States, as well as they also use campaign contributions. So these groups use different methods to get the message out. Alright, I think we have finished these first 4 slides or so I'm going to pause. Alright.